So it's been just about 2 years since I did my final distro comparison video. I did that video back in 2015 before I really knew what I was doing, and man, that video is bad. But the spirit of it is interesting. Now I've decided to revisit the idea of a distro comparison video because for each video I do that predominantly features a desktop environment, there's always people in the comments comparing another desktop environment to it. Most commonly with my KDE videos, people compare it to Xfce, which strikes me as a very odd choice, but at the same time, it's actually kind of interesting, so that's what this video is going to be about. Unlike the previous distro comparison videos that I did 2 years ago, we're not going to be looking at frames per second in this. We're going to be looking at system resource usage. So I've decided to use OpenSUSE Leap 42.2 for this video because I figured that if I used Kubuntu versus Xubuntu, there would be people that say, hey, those two aren't directly comparable because of this reason or that reason. Since we're using OpenSUSE Leap 42.2, literally the only difference is the desktop environment. We're also going to be comparing the two desktops side by side in a pair of virtual machines, specifically VMware. Both of the virtual machines have 2 CPUs, they have 2 gigs of RAM, and they have 700 megabytes of that RAM dedicated to the GPU, though we probably won't use it. Since we just booted into both VMs, let's open up HTOP and take a look at the baseline system resource usage. So it shouldn't be a huge surprise that Xfce is using less memory than KDE is. But what's interesting is that it's only using about 150 megabytes less. And at the top here, take a look at the tasks and threads. Xfce is actually using more tasks and threads. Now obviously that doesn't directly affect resource usage, but it's an interesting find nonetheless. So for the rest of this video, we're going to switch over to Xfce's task manager because HTOP is a bit too verbose and honestly it's not terribly friendly to look at for this type of video. We're going to be comparing KDE-specific applications and Xfce-specific applications side by side. The only exception to that is Firefox, because Firefox is an independent browser. It's not associated with KDE or Xfce, and it's the default web browser for OpenSUSE. The only changes I've made to the actual desktops is adding launchers for our test applications into the panel. For our KDE VM, I installed the Xfce Task Manager, and I changed the default display for memory, which I think was percentage, to the number of megabytes being used. So the first application we'll look at is the terminal emulator. Using the default profile, Xfce's terminal uses 44 megabytes less than KDE's console does. And of course, as we add new tabs to the terminal, the memory usage scales accordingly. Not really any huge surprises here. Next up is Firefox. Now given that Firefox is a desktop and distribution agnostic browser, we shouldn't see a difference between Xfce and KDE, and we don't. What's interesting though is as we add tabs to Firefox, on Xfce the memory usage grows more than it does in KDE. On the other hand, the Firefox child process on KDE's side uses more memory than the same process on Xfce's side. Next up are the file managers. Now this one is a little bit odd because Dolphin spawns subprocesses for each file or folder it has open. I'm not really sure how it works. But even if we compare the parent process, which is Dolphin, to Thunar, the difference is close to 50 megabytes. An interesting thing about the file managers is the resource consumption doesn't seem to change when you add tabs. So you can open a bunch of folders as tabs and it doesn't appear to have much of a resource impact. I noticed that after I tried to close Thunar, some sort of weird phantom daemon process stayed running in the background. I'm not sure if this is how Thunar works or if it's some sort of bug, but I could not kill this thing. It was very strange. Next on the list are the image viewers, Ristretto and GwinView. Now obviously Ristretto is going to blow the doors off of GwinView, but you have to consider that GwinView is almost like a photo editor in and of itself. I mean, if you just look at the edit menu, look at all the things that you can do to an image. It even has red-eye reduction. It's worth pointing out that opening a file in Ristretto had nearly no impact on memory usage, but it had a pretty sizable impact for GwinView. Following up on the image viewers are the text editors. So like the image viewers, this isn't really a fair comparison because, I mean, we're comparing LeafPad to Kwrite. Kwrite is almost like a small IDE by itself. LeafPad is more like Notepad. It's just very lightweight and simple, and that's it. Kwrite, on the other hand, is kind of a beast, and it has a sizable footprint. And like most KDE applications, Kwrite will spawn a child process when you open a file, which has the effect of increasing the memory footprint. So that means Kwrite by itself with a file open, you're looking at about 100 megabytes. That is pretty damn big. Now I know a lot of you will point out that KDE has another text editor called Kate. Kate was not installed by default on OpenSUSE, nor was it installed by default on KDE Neon, so I don't know if Kate is being deprecated or what, so that's why I stuck with Kwrite. Now we'll switch to the media players. Now even though Dragon Player seems to be the default or de facto KDE media player, it wasn't actually installed by default on KDE Neon, VLC was. However, on OpenSUSE it's installed by default, so I'm going to assume that that is sort of the default media player for KDE in general. So the difference in memory usage between the two media players is about 30, which, surprisingly enough, seems to be about the average between KDE and Xfce applications so far. And last up are the screenshot utilities. Now this might seem like kind of a weird pick, but Xfce has its own utility, and KDE has its own. Now the difference in memory usage between these two applications is about 50, but Spectacle, which is KDE's screenshotting utility, is actually really powerful. You can do cropping and customize the screenshot in a bunch of different ways before you export it to either just an image or some sort of image editor. So that was the last test application. So now what we're going to do is take a look at two different graphs. The first graph is a comparison of the memory usage between all of the test applications, with an exception of Firefox. I decided to leave Firefox out of this graph because we saw that memory usage was basically the same, and because the memory usage was so high it makes the graph look really weird. However, looking at this graph, you might be quick to point out that Xfce had lower memory usage all around. And while that may be true, Xfce and KDE applications don't compare well in a one-to-one comparison. Yes, Xfce applications use less memory on average than KDE applications, but they also do a whole hell of a lot less. So take for example the two text editors, LeafPad and Kwrite. Not only is Kwrite a simple text editor, but you could very easily and comfortably write code in there. Kwrite supports advanced options like automatic brackets, automatic indentation, auto-completion for certain languages. Not to mention it has the previewer on the side there. LeafPad doesn't really have any of that. So if you needed to do some light coding or editing to a file, you could very comfortably do that in Kwrite. If you needed to do the same on Xfce, you might have to reach out to a different editor, in which case now you're increasing the memory footprint because you're going to have to install and run something else. Now let's take a look at the second graph. This graph shows two scenarios: memory usage after a cold reboot in a new session, and memory usage with all of our test applications open and running. The difference between memory usage in a brand new session is only about 150 megabytes. Now in my opinion, for most users, 150 megabytes is negligible. Unless you're running on a system that has very, very low resources, you won't even notice that 150 megabytes. Now the memory usage gap between the two environments grows as we add applications, but it's still not a huge difference. With all of our test applications running, we're looking at a difference of less than 300 megabytes. Now it's worth pointing out that our testbed was OpenSUSE Leap. By default, OpenSUSE Leap with KDE comes installed with a bunch of extra stuff like KDE PIM and some other non-essential packages. I'm willing to bet that if you looked at the memory usage on a super lean and fit distribution of KDE like KDE Neon, that the difference here would be even less. But I think that's going to wrap this video up. Now I want to emphasize that this is not a scientific benchmark, and in fact I want to use the term benchmark loosely because it's barely a benchmark. I think that this is a fun little comparison between two very different desktop environments, and your mileage will vary. Depending on the distribution and your own hardware setup, you could see more memory usage, more CPU usage, or less. The main takeaway for me in this video is KDE seems to have a reputation of being a very heavy, memory-hungry desktop environment. And given that we have open something like 7 applications and it's not even using more than a gigabyte of RAM, especially when you put it alongside Xfce, it's really not that bad at all. Xfce is still a lightweight desktop as far as memory usage goes, but honestly, KDE isn't really that far behind, or at least not as far as it used to be. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate all your support, and thanks for watching.